So this is what we were supposed to have done 2 weeks ago, right? So I'll do that today. Je vais mettre aussi quand même en fait la semaine 7 sur la fiche. Là, je pense que si vous avez accès, j'ai mis tout le classe. Je sais qu'on va dire en fait qu'ils m'ont dit est-ce que vous avez mis des choses sur la fiche là. Okay, so 3 weeks ago, if we remember before, we looked at we started to look at the executive branch, right? The executive branch. Does anyone remember the difference? What is the executive branch? This is the United States of America, right? Si on avait parlé de legislature, Great. So the legislature, as you said, right, they make the law, they vote on the laws in the Senate, and the executive branch, right, they apply the law. Well, the word that we have is enforce the law. Right? Enforce the law. The other word is they enforce and they maintain. Who is the head of the executive branch? Who is the boss of the executive branch? Yeah, the president. Great. So the president, right? President. So the president is in charge of, we spoke about this, right? In charge of the police, the army, etc., etc. Right, the next person charge of the executive branch, okay, is the vice president. Vice president. And the current vice president is a woman called Kamala Harris. Who has heard of Kamala Harris? Great. Good. So, she is very famous now, not just because she is the vice president, but because, we'll go back to this in a second. So she is the first African American, the first Asian American, and the first female occupant of this office. So she's important because she's the vice president, but she's also important because she, is the first person to have the second highest office in America to be a woman, African American, and Asian American. So very, very important for historically, you could say, for these reasons. Historically, for these reasons. Today we're going to be concentrating on Harris. But before we look a bit closer at Harris, let's have a look just very, very briefly here at the American Vice Presidency. So, what is and who does, who is and what do they do? Right? So the Vice President of the United States is the second highest officer in the executive branch of the U.S. President, after the President, obviously. So, most modern Vice Presidents, serve as a key presidential advisor, governing partner, and representative of the President. As the Vice President's role within the executive branch has expanded, the legislative branch role has contracted. So the Vice President, the nation's history. But the role began steadily growing during the 1930s, with the office of the Vice President being created in the executive branch in 1939. So the Vice President now has office in legislature, a whole sector of dedicated. This wasn't always the case, right? But now it is very, very common for the Vice President to be chosen by, how can I put this? So, to become the President of the United States of America, firstly, your party has to vote for you as the candidate. Also trying to be the president strategically. the different parties, right, like all parties, have different voices inside the parties. Right? Some, for example, let's think of just the Parti Socialiste. Right? The Socialist Party has those who are more like, well, Macron is the Parti Socialiste. So we have those who are more like Macron, also, if you think about it, Mélenchon, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, aussi, avant, était dans le Parti Socialiste. Donc il y a des voix différentes à l'intérieur des partis. So, what happens, c'est exactement pareil aux États-Unis. So what happens is the person is chosen normally thinks, okay, who can I choose that can help me win presidency? So Biden, he's not he's not completely left wing, right? He's not completely right wing. He's quite central. But he chose Harris, arguably because this is controversial, because of what is called the Afro-American vote. The Afro-American vote. Very important in the Democratic Party. One, Barack Obama, the presidency. The African-American vote was slightly was divided, if you will. You're going to say something? Sorry. It was divided kind of between Harris and Sanders. Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders also lost. Right? Bernie Sanders is far more left-wing than Biden is. So what Biden decided to do is that instead, but it's interesting, the African-American vote were voting for Bernie Sanders. Slightly more left-wing, slightly better history in terms of Biden, in terms of his kind of racial policies as well. But Biden didn't want to choose Bernie Sanders as vice president running because he thought that it would be too left-wing. So he chose Harris. Harris is an African American, was popular among African Americans, but wasn't quite right-wing, was more over here. So it was also a strategic decision to get someone on board that could represent what they call the wide church of the party, l'église large of the party. Okay, so that's why Harris was chosen. What? Yeah. I think so as well, because there were many, yes, there are many Democrats that are supporters of Hillary Clinton. There are a lot of voters for the Democratic Party, not just the Democratic Party actually, who are quote unquote, progressive feminists, right? And saw in Hillary Clinton the chance of having the first female president. It's not something unimportant at all. There are lots of people that want that. And so Harris also, being a woman, is also a strategic. She's a good person to choose because she's not too radical, she's not too left wing. For Biden, yeah. She's a woman. She's similar policies to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton and her were friends. She's also African American, and she's also. So yeah, I think it is important as well. American politics is very much like this. You have to position your external face, if you will, to different people. And so Harris was very important for that, and still is. So, who is Kamala Harris? He said, right? She's a 59th and current president. Again, first African American, first Asian American, first female. It's very important stuff. So, a member of the Democratic Party, she served as a United States Senator, actually for California. So, for California from 2017 to 2021. So she was a senator. So she voted in the Senate. Before that, she was the Attorney General of California from 2011 to 2017. So what's an attorney? Do you know an attorney? Yeah. and then she became the vice president. So, and then obviously Biden and Harris beat Trump in Paris. So they're now the president and another thing very interesting about Harris, you find these things interesting, is that Harris has served in every branch of the US government, right? So, having studied law at California University, she became district attorney, then general attorney. Okay, so being an attorney here, you're part of the judiciary. The judiciary are judges, lawyers, attorneys, etc. So those who pass sentences. So they don't enforce, they don't create laws, they pass judgments, right? So she was an attorney, a district attorney, a federal attorney. She would pass judgments. She was also then a senator. She voted on laws in the Senate. Right? So judiciary, senator, legislature, then vice president. So very rare, actually. It's very rare to have someone who's taking all of the branches. Being a senator then a president is more known. Very few manage to go all the way through. She's a very knowledgeable person in different sectors. Okay, so there we have a bit of a history. So we're going to look at a video now, which looks at Kamala Harris's what we call criminal justice record. So before being the vice president, she obviously was very active in politics, very active. From the 2000s, right? So when you become a president or a vice president, the first thing, actually, even when you're a candidate to become a president, the first thing that happens is that the media, right, the news stations say, what have you done in the past? What have you done in the past? That then becomes very, very important for trying to understand who they are. Right? This is what they do. You know, they try and, what we say, dig out the cobwebs, the skeletons, we say this as well, the skeletons in the closet. Skeletons in the closet. This is yeah, exactly. This is what I was going to say. They try to find everything bad about you, of course. Yeah. Skeleton in a closet is, the things that you've hidden. It literally means if you killed someone and you've hidden the skeleton, right? You've hidden the body. So that's what it comes from. It's an expression used all the time, right? And does that person have any skeletons in their closet? Skeletons in their closet. Kamala Harris has not killed anyone, of course, and certainly didn't have as many skeletons in her closet as Trump had in his closet. Trump had many skeletons in his closet, to talk about, to use the expression. But of course, this is what the media wants, right? The media wants to make a kind of scandal. There isn't really one with Kamala Harris, there isn't a scandal. But there are things which are, questionable in a sense. There are things that we need to judge her in a way. So this is what the video is about. The video is about what Kamala Harris has done or did do in her previous career. So, as is usual, je n'ai pas imprimé en fait ces questions. Est-ce que vous voulez les noter? Quand vous êtes en train de noter, je vais juste parler des questions comme ça au fond des questions. So, this is a video about her history in relation to justice, criminal justice, so her relation to crimes. And what she did in relation to crimes. So the first question is, how do people interpret the notion of false choice when it comes to mental health? So, tout au début de la vidéo, on va entendre false choice many times. That's false choice. And people interpret this because Kamala Harris uses this term, false choice, a lot. She says false choice a lot. So, how do people interpret this notion? Il y a un peu deux sens en fait qui est donné en fait de false choice. Faux choix. Number two, what did Joe Biden say about crime in 2007? So, aussi dans la vidéo, il y a Biden qui parle du crime. Et qui parle du crime, mais aussi qui parle de la police. And in 2007, so we're going back a bit, right? And just to tell you, la date va être à peu près ici, en fait, ça va être écrit 2007. Et Biden est très présent dans la vidéo, vous allez voir. Je vais vous montrer un peu le visage de Biden, mais ça va être écrit aussi Biden. Et ici, la date ici. So, 3. What was Kamala Harris proud of during her time as attorney? So, on a été avocat, disons, il était fier de quelque chose qu'elle avait fait. Qu'est-ce que c'était? Il est fier de quelque chose. Il va dire ça aussi. 4. So, beyond, au-delà, beyond violent crimes, les crimes, so violent crimes, what other convictions rose during her tenure? So tenure, c'est une espèce de période où on est embauché. C'est ça, tenure. Okay? For example, it's a bit like saying titulaire de quelque chose. Par exemple, un prof qui est titulaire, qui est agrégé aux États-Unis, has tenure. What has tenure? C'est un peu comme une période de temps stable où on est embauché, un peu comme si on veut. During her period of tenure. So other than, different than violent crimes. So violent crimes are crimes like murder, rape. If, for example, someone steals from you, it uses violence. So in English, we have theft, robbery. So theft is a bit like voler. On peut voler des choses sans être violent. So we have robbery. We rob someone, right? We rob someone. Exactly, a flame or a gun or a knife. So robbery is the violent crime, right? It can also be, beating someone up, being violent against someone, against your wife, against your husband, etc. So there are other crimes that aren't violent, right? So, what policy really turns some heads in a while? We have cette expression aussi idiomatique, turning heads, turn some heads.
Trend we have to look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Not like it's bother us, but like maybe frighten us.
Yeah. It's like exactly. So it's like it can be so strange, unexpected. It could be surprising, right? Surprising as well. And often it's a bit like, pourquoi elle a fait ça? A bit like this, pourquoi? So it's this idea of kind of going a bit like turning some heads. On peut voir l'image, en fait, c'est ce qui fait qu'on est la tête. It's like this. Okay, so it's like that. So she says this as well, right? She says, elle dit, quelque chose, c'est ça, ok, le poste de train, c'est un jeune expérience, et justifie en fait le fait qu'il a créé ça. Yeah, c'est des trucs de on va voir pourquoi. Mais et so, il a écrit quelque chose voilà, qui est super beau, et comment elle justifie cette création? Number one. When Harris was running for president, okay, what desire did she outline? La sorte de désir qu'elle explique à la fin. Et ça, c'était quand elle voulait devenir le candidat. Très nul. Je ne pas à la classe. Okay, so c'est des deux en fait, les 4 minutes plus lents que les autres. Voilà, on va refaire. J'avais le temps. Okay, so we're going to try and do it twice, okay?
During the 80s and 90s.
But Harris claimed in the 2000s she didn't flex laws like three strikes. She said as DA, her policy was only to pursue a third strike if the crime was serious or violent. And yet she remained proud that the felony conviction rate rose during her tenure.
When we're talking about serious and violent crime, lock them up. In San Francisco, in my office, we've increased the conviction rates from the DA's office to the highest they've been in just under 15 years.
But her attempt to brand smart on crime policy goes beyond those serious and violent crimes. According to Mercury News, she had more convictions on marijuana charges than her predecessor.
Okay. So, what does this mean, this false choice? So how do people interpret the notion of false choice when it comes to Kamala Harris? Yeah?
In very different ways. Either she refuses to be put in the box, or she refuses to commit to any policy, or because she is not on crime, but also a reformer.
Exactly, great. So all of those things. So refuses to be put in a box, refuses to commit to any particular policy, as well as her approach, right? Between tough on crime and the reformer. And this is what she means when, it wasn't very clear actually in the video, but she kept on saying false choice because people were saying to her, well, you can't be both tough on crime and a reformer, right? And she was saying, that's a false choice. I can be tough on crime and I can be a reformer. So that last bit really does where it comes from. The reason why, in a sense, that is a choice is because kind of what Biden says after this, right? So that tough on crime usually means more police. Usually means get people in jail or prison. It doesn't mean, defunding the police or investing into programs, different types of programs. So this is kind of what, being tough on crime is what Biden was in the 2000s. So what did he say? What did Biden say in 2007?
He said fewer police means more crime.
Right, exactly. So we said fewer police on the streets, preventing crimes, protecting the community means more crime. It's as simple as that. It's not rocket science. We went through this debate in the 80s and 90s. Right? So this is a very conservative, Wisconsin idea. Right? The idea that the only way to stop crime is to have more police. Okay? This now, obviously, has been massively critiqued and questioned in France, as it is in America, right? Especially with l'idée de la violence policière, comme aussi en France, comme aux États-Unis. Il y a des gens aussi qui sont morts aux États-Unis, comme George Floyd, ouais, comme en France. Hein. Un peu moins en Angleterre, mais c'est pareil aussi, il y a des gens qui sont morts à cause de la police. We only have to think of, in France, Ferré, Adama, these people, Abagaba, who were killed in the presence of the what was Kamala Harris proud of during that time as elle était fière de quelque chose, elle était fière de quoi? Yeah, Rose, yeah, good. So, she was proud of the felony conviction rate. So the conviction rate rose during her tenure. That should be tenure. Not tenure. Tenure means actually soup. So the highest rate of conviction of violent crimes in 15 years, right? Felony rate. So she was proud of this. Conviction rate. And she said, if you heard it, she said, when it comes to violent crime, lock them up. She said, lock them up. And I think this is where we get this, with this next one as well, we get this idea of false, why she thinks it's a false choice. Yeah?
She talked about three strikes.
Yeah, okay. the three strike method is it's actually not related to violent crime, it's related to non-violent crime. So we'll see this next actually. The three strikes are, for example, okay, you're arrested, let's look at the next one that we're talking about, right? So beyond violent crimes, what other convictions rose during her tenure? And were these people sent to jail? Anyone else have an answer to this? Yep. Yeah, exactly. So, and this was, did you say marijuana?
No, yes. For example, she wants to decriminalize marijuana for the safety of the community.
Yeah, perfect, exactly. So the charges, marijuana charges increased, right? But as you said, she really sent them, she rarely sent this, that's right, it's really common. Were these people sent to jail? Rarely. That's what I mean. She preferred to send them to programs back on track. And this is what you're saying, right? She sent them to programs. And so this is what the three strike idea is. So in some states, say you're arrested for marijuana possession, okay, 3 times. You get an official warning twice. On the 3rd time, you're then arrested. You're arrested prior to this, you're then can be sent to jail. Right, okay. And Kamala Harris, instead of sending people marijuana charges, what's called petty crime in English? Petty crime. And if you can imagine what the word petty comes from, petit. It's like petit bourgeois in English, we have petty bourgeois. It's been small. Petty crime or petty theft, we also sometimes say. It's like, if someone stole, quel de coca, that's a petty crime. And she decided that it's not a good idea to send these people to jail. There is huge evidence that suggests that if you send someone to jail for small crimes, they become, the criminality increases. Mostly because they meet actually other criminals in jail. And there's a certain criminality that occurs in jail which often doesn't lead to positive results, right? So she wanted to send them to programs, right? Positive things. This is the kind of reform. We see this kind of reform idea. The tough on crime is much more the idea of increasing police forces. So this was her most controversial thing, right? So what policy really turned heads?
It was about free schools children. When children go to school, they were arrested,
Yeah.
parents and criminalized.
Did we hear, what is the word for when you don't go to school? Did you hear this word? Here's the T. So if you skip school, if you decide not to go to school, but you're supposed to go to school, there is a word in there. You don't hear? Good? Great, yes, perfect. Truancy. Truancy. I don't know if anybody else in the room is fantastic. Okay, so we do truancy for that. Thank you. So, as you said, right, so anti-truancy policies, against truancy. And it turned heads because it threatened to charge parents if that should be there. Children missed school. And what were her regrets regarding this policy?
There was the story of parents being penalized
she put in place. So it's a bit hypocritical that she's sorry for something that she did. You know, this is one of the big skeletons, just say, well, you know, it's nothing like Trump, but you know, is that people had a bit forgotten about this, that she did this, and you know, it really wasn't something very progressive at all. A lot of truancy, you know, doesn't. It's not necessarily the fault of the parents in that sense. Criminalizing the parents certainly doesn't make children go to school very much. Often it happens when you know parents are working working a lot, you know, sometimes day and night. It's very difficult to have time with their children, and so this kind of happens. You know, there are many social reasons why children don't go to school, and so often there are also poorer families. So finding the parents certainly isn't very good idea. It didn't work either. This one is more progressive. So what did she create that was the first of its kind? And how did she justify its creation? Yeah, it was linked to this, yeah.
A lot of people doesn't know, talk about the police and doesn't know what it's about. And so she wants to study that about it and see where the cameras are and a lot of research.
Exactly, that's perfect. So it was the cameras as well as the national database. They were linked, the national database. It's true, I should have written the cameras, because the cameras, she introduced this, it was the first time as well, so you're cool. In particular, it was a database of deaths in police custody. So she said that people were talking anecdotally about what is wrong, right, in the system. There was no data. And as you said, she wanted to put things up. I think this is very important, actually, because you know, there are lots of things that occur within the police force that aren't filmed, for example, that we don't know what happens, and you know, we do need to have evidence, right? And in a certain sense, this also protects the police, right? We know what's happening, so we have the data, we can then assess the problems that are there. Right? Okay. And lastly, because I'm last waiting, so when Harris was running for president, what desires did she have?
Reform the criminal police system.
Great, good. So she wanted to reform the political police system, and the things that she said was she wanted to end mandatory minimum sentences on the federal level and encourage investigation of officer-involved shootings. And the reform is definitely what she said, and this mandatory minimum sentence was still very controversial. It means that, for example, not in all states, say you are arrested after 3 times for having marijuana, right? There's a minimum sentence for marijuana, 5 years. You get sent to jail for 5 years. She wanted to remove these because she thought that some of these minimal sentences, again, were not for the hand. Okay, cool. Voilà. Merci beaucoup et Gracias.